So I think right now we can begin. The topic I want to discuss today is unfair termination. You know, we are living in a period whereby employers are trying to reduce costs. So people are being laid off and told to go home. But before an employee is actually to go home, there are certain procedures that must be followed. And the first procedure is that an employee must be notified of the reason why they're being terminated. And we also have situations whereby, of course, an employee can be stubborn and contribute to their termination. Some of these reasons include a person who is abusive to the supervisor, and that is provided under the Employment Act. I'll be giving you the specific sections. Let's say you're abusive or you leave work without having, you actually leave work without leave or any lawful cause. Maybe you abscond duty, maybe you actually negligently refuse to perform work that you signed up for within your employment contract. So these are reasons that can actually make you either get a suspension, or you can get a summary dismissal, or you can actually be terminated completely from employment. But even with this termination, there's a procedure that has been laid out. And even if you left work without any authorization and the procedure is not followed, still your employer can be held liable for actually terminating you if he has not followed this particular procedure. So I want us to look some of the things that the court will look at to determine whether termination is actually fair or unfair. Is that the court is going to look at the reason for termination. Yeah, the reason for termination will be looked at, and if that reason is lawful and the procedure has been followed, then that termination will be considered fair and lawful according to the Employment Act of Kenya. So the specific sections to look out for as a labor law student is section 45 of the Employment Act of Kenya. Before you go into any exam, you need to understand that section because it sets out the threshold, yeah, for termination, meaning that if that process is not followed, then that termination will be considered unfair. And the other thing we need to remember is that the employer must actually prove the reason why they terminated you. Remember also, you can be terminated because maybe there's physical incapacity. Let's say you were employed to operate machines in a factory, and then you get into an accident, you no longer have arms to operate these machines. Obviously, as you can see in this particular situation, you can be terminated from work because you're no longer capable. But remember, even when this termination is being carried out, there is process that must actually be followed. So watch out for section 45 of the Employment Act of Kenya and section 43 of the Employment Act of Kenya, because remember that termination must actually there's a certain procedure that has to be followed. And the other thing you need to remember is that you cannot just receive either an email or an M-Pesa message terminating you from employment. You actually need to be notified, and you need to be called. There has to be a fair hearing. Someone can't terminate you over phone call. That is illegal. And if you go to court and this procedure was not followed, that was stipulated within the meaning of Article 40, rather Section 45 of the Employment Act of Kenya, then the employer will still be held liable. So the other thing we need to remember is that we also have situations that amount to gross misconduct, meaning that you can actually be chased away from work and it was your fault. Maybe you're drunk, you show up at work drunk. That is one of the reasons why you can be terminated. But like I said, no matter how bad you are as an employee, fair process has to be followed. Key sections, remember, section 45, section 43 of the Employment Act, and section 41 of the Employment Act of Kenya. So let me look at some of the questions that you're posting so that I know what I can address as far as labor law in Kenya is concerned. So the question on protection of children, I've addressed it. We said we have circumstances when some children can actually be employed according to their age and where they can be authorized to work. And I've covered this in one of the videos I did on child labor in Kenya. So please consider looking out for that video. The next question is on, let me address the question of women. When it comes to women, the rights of women during maternity leave. Remember, as a woman, you're entitled to maternity leave. It's a legal requirement. It is not something that your employer gives you. The law has provided for that. And when you go for this maternity leave, when after finishing the process of, I mean, you've gone home, you delivered your baby, and you're coming back to work. When you come back to the workplace, the employer must actually give you the previous position you held or a position similar to that one. That is one of your rights. They have to take you back to where you were before. And remember, also, you need to be paid for the time that you're away from work. And the other thing you need to remember is that for you to be able to tackle a question on maternity leave very well, I have done also a very elaborate video on maternity leave in Kenya. So please consider checking out that video to find out the rights of women during maternity leave, to know what entitlements do you have even before you go to that HR director asking for to be allowed to go home on maternity leave. You need to know these things. They're so basic, and maternity leave is provided for under Section 29 of the Employment Act of Kenya. And please, again, refer back to the labor law section under Nairobi Legal Insights. Watch the entire video on maternity leave and appreciate the concepts. For a student, you need to understand the sections. And even as you plan to go into a labor law exam for students, remember that anytime you say anything out or anytime you're having a discussion or answering a question, you will need to use case law. And for case law, most of these cases are just online on Kenya Law Resources. You can always find those cases, but I've outlined the possible cases that you can actually read as far as maternity leave is concerned. So the other thing I would want, again, maybe to share about is issues of sexual harassment at the workplace. Remember that sexual harassment is also provided for under the Employment Act of Kenya. And still, again, it's a general principle of employment that I elaborated at the start of the labor law section. As far as sexual harassment is concerned, if you're given any preferential treatment, or if you are a lady and maybe you're working for company X and you have this manager who keeps on touching you in such a way that you're not comfortable, you have this man who keeps on following you from work. Every time you leave the office, you have this guy who follows you up. There's a person, whether it's your supervisor, who actually invites you to his house, and you're intimidated. You don't know what to do because this is your boss inviting you to his house. Yeah, all those things I've just stated constitute sexual harassment in the meaning of Section 6 of the Employment Act of Kenya. Please consider watching the video I did on sexual harassment. And there was actually a very interesting case that involved a lady who once, she was employed, and the motive of employing her was that the manager wanted to have sex with her, and the manager went ahead to book a hotels in South Africa, and he actually booked one single room because he knew he wanted to sleep with this lady. She resisted sleeping with him, and because she had no means, she had nowhere to sleep, she ended up spending the whole night on the floor while the manager slept on the bed. And later on, she talked to her brother who booked an air ticket for her to come back to Kenya. And when the manager came back to Kenya, he was very annoyed at her, and he sent her some emails telling her that I thought I employed you so that you could easily jump in bed with me, but now that you failed, I'll make sure that I deal with you seriously. You see, this was evidence. And remember, if you send for an email or a text that involves any kind of sexual intimidation, someone is just trying to put you in a situation whereby you can give in because they're your senior, those emails are very important. And for a labor law student, the reason why I'm giving this example is that I have a detailed case I've provided on sexual harassment under the topic of sexual harassment that I posted on Nairobi. So when this happened and this lady was intimidated, she actually went to court and sued, and she had the evidence. She had the records, the emails from the boss, and I think she was awarded over 4 million damages. So if you sense any kind of habit that is you're not comfortable with, especially if you want to understand what constitutes sexual harassment in the Kenyan context, please consider watching that particular video so that you appreciate that topic. So the next, yes, some of the remedies that an employee can, of course, seek in sexual harassment cases will be compensation. They will be paid. Sometimes maybe someone even fired you and you spent some months without being paid, you'll be forced to actually cover for all those months that they didn't pay your salary. The other thing you need to know is discrimination. At the workplace, you can't be discriminated against based either on your gender, sex, your nationality. It doesn't matter. And still, again, for a student of labor law who is looking into answering a question on discrimination, I've done a detailed video on the same. And just to give you an example, there was a case that involved one of the ladies. You know, most cases that involve sexual harassment or HIV, the name of the victim is never mentioned, so they can use an initial. So this lady was employed by Queer, and she was working as at first she was a cleaner. Then when she started this kind of employment, all the men along her. Remember, she started out as a casual laborer, and as time went on, all men were getting promotions while she was being left out. Other people were getting more opportunities. And later on, she came to discover that the reason why she was missing out on several opportunities is because, number one, she was a woman and she was being discriminated against. And there was also a job that was advertised along the way. And this lady applied, but the first requirement was to test for her health. So when she was tested for her health, the doctor went ahead to test her for HIV without her consent. And once the management of Queer realized that she was HIV positive, she was denied this new opportunity. So this is how she was not granted a chance to progress in her career. She went ahead to sue for discrimination based on gender, discrimination based on gender and sex, and she actually won this case. And the reason why I'm bringing out this example is that this particular case, I've still elaborated it under the topic of discrimination at the workplace. We need to understand what amounts to discrimination at the workplace, what elements constitute discrimination. I've actually done a detailed summary of what you need to prove, because remember that as far as sexual harassment or discrimination is concerned, most of the times the liability is on the employer to actually come and prove that they try to protect you during that entire process. So some of, in line with sexual harassment, some of the steps that employers can take is, remember that you need a sexual harassment policy set out. And once you have this sexual harassment policy, then that way you can be able to manage your employees within the organization. And they have to be enlightened about this sexual harassment policy, meaning that should an employee complain about this issue of sexual harassment, you need to take it so seriously so that you resolve it within the organization. Otherwise, when the employee goes ahead to sue, in most cases, an employee will sue the owner of the company plus the employee who sexually harassed that particular employee. Remember that the employer must protect you at all times from issues of sexual harassment. And so one of the points that I can address this issue is having a sexual harassment policy put in place. And so you can continue posting your questions, but again, just to remind you, we have several videos we've done on sexual harassment, discrimination, and child labor within the Kenyan context. The other issue I want us maybe to understand is that we have an issue whereby an employee's salary may be reduced. Maybe if you work for your employer and you destroy their property, they go ahead to deduct a portion of your salary so that they can recover the damage you caused. But remember, at all times, even if your salary is being reduced, you must at least go home with a third of that salary, meaning that 2/3 of your salary cannot be cut by your employer. It is, you must go. What I'm trying to emphasize here is you must at least go home with a third of your salary, even if there's been an issue whereby maybe some money needs to be cut off so that it can be used to compensate for the damage you might have caused at your workplace. And for you as a law student who is preparing for an exam, I've done a detailed video for this, and I'm giving more of general information to help that particular person who may want just to understand what happens if my salary is being reduced, because that's all they need to know, that you must at least go home with a third of your salary if it's being deducted. For details and sections and case law, please refer to the video I've done. as far as reduction of salaries is concerned. So more questions? And this is the first live we are doing. Just remind you, over time, we are going to be coming up with specific topics. You can forward your suggestions on what we can do better. You can always forward your questions to me by email, because each video I do, I normally add an email address in case you have a burning issue that you need to be that needs to be addressed. Remember to share that issue. It is the beginning of everything that matters. Remember that whatever thing you've dreamt of doing, you need to start. So this is something that is so important to me, and I want to add value to you as you study labor law and many other units that you would want to be covered in the Kenyan context. So in case of any further questions, please post them. So the other thing we need to remember is that I've seen a question here that can an employer terminate your contract based on based on something you posted on social media. So here, let me give you an example. If you've been employed maybe and your position holds the image of the organization, so that can be a source, it can be misconduct on your side. Maybe you hold a critical position that the image and the brand of the organization is yourself. So you hold this image of the organization. So in that case, if probably your contract required you to behave in a very proper manner so that you don't end up discrediting the image of the organization, then that way you can actually, based on the misconduct you have, if the termination is going to be there based on whatever you've posted, and whatever you've posted is affecting the image of the organization, you can be terminated. But remember, there has to be fair process followed. And that takes you back to Section 45 of the Employment Act of Kenya. You must be notified, you must be given a reason for termination. There has to be fair procedure. Even if you're on the wrong and this process is not followed, then you're actually going to be considered unfairly and unlawfully terminated, and there will be compensation given to you as an employee. So I'm seeing another comment for me to do more videos on first year. I'll consider doing this. Thank you so much for raising this. And again, this is for the start. We hope to build more and engaging more. Through these live videos, I'm able to communicate with you and understand what you need to understand from my side so that we continue engaging. The other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of employment law is a probationary contract. Now, there's something called a probationary contract, and this is a contract that is normally given to new employees. Yeah, so if you've just been employed, you're a fresh employee, you may be given a probationary contract, and the reason for giving you this contract is probably to test your capability in line with the job that you're actually being given. But according to Section 2 of the Employment Act of Kenya, remember this Act of Kenya is available online. You can download the Employment Act of Kenya 2007 online. And when you check under Section 2, scroll through or control, find probationary contract. Probationary contract must not be more than 12 months. And this same contract must be in writing, stating the period of probation. Meaning that if you've been given a probationary contract, the one thing you need to understand with probationary contracts, even if you're terminated, it does not give you a guarantee that your employer must have followed the process I described earlier. So as far as termination of employment is concerned, and the minimum requirements that must be followed before you're terminated, those requirements apply to employees, not people on probationary contracts. So on probationary contracts, this is something you're doing at will, and this process under Section 45 will not apply to you if you're actually working under probationary contract. So you should be in a position to understand, am I signing a probationary contract? Am I signing a contract of service? Remember, contract of service is a contract that's a contract of employment. Now, a contract for service is an independent contractor contract, and this means that the person has not been employed, but they're offering a service. Yeah. So let me give you an example here. A company can employ someone maybe to do marketing consulting. but you're not the employee of that particular company. That means you're working on a contract for service. But if someone has employed you and they have control over your time, control of how you do your work, and they pay you a salary, you're basically the employee. That is called a contract of service. So get the distinction between a contract for service, a contract of service, and a probationary contract. It's very, very critical. And I urge you to, if you are a person who just wants to understand the basics of employment law, we have the Employment Act of Kenya 2007. If you're a law student preparing for exams, remember to watch the videos I've posted. I've taken time to break down the case law, the section, and each and everything. Number two, the next question I want us to look at is the question of, now, as far as I'm seeing a question that has been posted about labor unions, remember that as far as labor unions are concerned, I want to highlight one key thing as far as termination of employment is concerned. If you're a member of a labor union and maybe you're involved in a strike and your employer is trying to rely on that to terminate your contract of employment, that will be considered unlawful. Yeah. Remember, as an employee, you're also allowed to get involved in a strike. You can strike, and your employer cannot take advantage of that situation. Number two, if you're a woman and go on leave, even if your employer has refused to go on maternity leave and you still go, and your employer goes ahead to sack you from employment, that is considered unlawful employment, because legally it doesn't matter what your employer says, you are actually entitled to that leave. Now, just to take you back again, remember in employment, we may have oral and written contracts. And as far as oral contracts are concerned, I mean, these are verbal contracts. So if I meet you today and I give you a job, yeah, and we speak orally without writing down the contract, and then later on I change, maybe I tell you the salary we agreed was not 70K, but 20,000. And I end up also sacking you along the way because I feel like I can't afford to pay you because I just used words to express what I wanted from you. In this particular instance, if you actually go to court, you're going to win that case because it's a duty of the employer to reduce an oral contract into writing. And it's a duty of the employer to actually keep employee records. If those records are not kept by the employer and he's trying to take advantage of the situation that you entered into an oral contract with that particular employer, as an employee, you're still going to win that case. And when you go to court, because you had an oral contract that was more than 3 months and your employer didn't take the initiative to reduce that oral contract into writing, the court is going to interpret everything, yeah, in your favor, because the employee, or rather the employer, has the duty to reduce an oral contract into writing and also keep work records. As a person preparing for labor law exam or as a student of labor law, I've done a detailed video on this particular instance I just described. Go there, find the case law, find the particular sections, find everything possible that you can use to actually be able to tackle a simple labor law exam. So more questions, you can continue sharing more questions. I can also diverge a bit because this is our first video on labor law. Remember to be able to share some of our videos. Remember to comment on some of our videos so that we get the feedback and improve along the way. And this being our first live, I'm so grateful that all of you guys are here. I'm actually very happy because I've gotten a chance to interact with you directly. Most of the times I'll do a slideshow and you can tell me where I can improve. Most of the time you hear me in the background without a video, but as time goes on, you're going to have more engaging videos that actually involve me speaking to you. You can always reach out to me, and like I've seen earlier on in the chat, I'm going to be doing more videos on law as far as first year is concerned. In case you have more questions, please post them because we're going to be ending our live in the next 10 minutes. So again, let me give you an outline. As a law student, if you joined this live, when tackling a question on employment law, remember the IRAC. And that's very important that you spot out the issue, find, you do the analysis, you find out a case that applies to that particular instance, and then you write a detailed conclusion, yeah? So what I mean here is that every time you're given a question, think about the who, why, what, how, yeah? And think about IRAC. And in labor law, each question you answer must be backed up with, because this is labor law we're talking about. If you're talking about any statement, whether it's maternity leave, whether it's paternity leave, whether it's the rights and duties of employees, you need to use a section of law. And if you want to remember sections of law, the most important thing is that you must read a case, because a case gives you an overview of what you need, and it makes you understand a section much better compared to when you just read a section of the act. You need to read a case and know how it applies. And I'm going to be doing another video so that I outline the key sections of labor law in Kenya for any student who may want to understand labor law. But as I can see, we have about a few people who have attended this session. Please, again, feel free to send your questions. I'll be able to answer them. If I've not been able to answer them right now, then I'll be able to answer them in the chat box. So as far as labor law is concerned, we have the Employment and Labor Law Court. That is where these cases are normally filed. And by the way, if you just want to have an overview of these concepts of labor law, after watching the videos we've actually done on labor law in Kenya, you can go to Kenya Law Resources. I can outline for you the cases that are very critical. Go read through those cases, because as a person who is not a law student, having understood the concepts underlying labor law, then you can be able to read a case and appreciate its concepts. That is very, very critical. And to be able also to understand anything to do with law, please continue reading case law. That is the only way you can grasp a concept. That is the only way you practice law. That is the only way you remember concepts. Yeah, so I think that is a bit of advice I would give to you as a student preparing for the exam. So, in about the next 7 minutes, we'll be finishing our live. Thank you so much for those who attended. I'm so grateful. It doesn't matter the number. I'm very happy that I've been able to interact with you. And as time moves forward, we are going to be coming up with more topics. And remember, you are my first ambassadors. I'm so happy that you're here. Continue sharing, continue telling your friends, so that next time we continue growing this movement. This comes at a time whereby in Kenya, we don't have anyone who explains legal content in the Kenyan context. So I want us to be able to understand these things, because when I went through law school, no one gave me a chance to understand what the law in Kenya looked like. Every time I checked something, it was an Indian explaining law in the Indian context. Now we have a chance to understand law in the Kenyan context. We have a chance to learn from each other. And you being my first ambassadors, I'm so grateful that you're here. And I know this movement is going to continue growing, and we are going to become bigger and better. You can always reach out for ideas. You can always reach out for what to improve on. And as far if you're doing business law, you can tell your friends who are doing business law or IT law. We'll have a session whereby you're going to cover the entire course, basically a breakdown of IT law. And when we say IT law, basically what we've done is that we've gotten small portions of different areas of law and put them together. And this can also move into business law, economics, wherever. Every time you hear the word law, it's just a combination of small topics put together but relevant to a specific field. So for business law, we shall be doing that. And I'm so grateful for each and everything. Please continue from today. Every time I post a video, share your comments on what I can do better for you, because the more I share this content is the more I learn from you, is the more I learn myself. I appreciate that, because that's the only way you learn. We have about 4 minutes to get done with this live video. So in terms of, I've seen a comment here, learning about labor law in Kenya. I stated earlier, I've done several videos on labor law in Kenya. Please consider reviewing those video. They're very informative. And the reason why I actually normally use the slideshows is because they help a person who doesn't understand law. Even if you can't understand what I'm saying, you can pause that video and read through the slides I prepare for you. so that you understand these concepts. You don't have sometimes to be a lawyer to know the law. Remember, ignorance of the law is not defense. Yeah, you don't have to be a lawyer to understand the law. We live in a situation whereby even if I told you to download the Employment Act and read for yourself, it will be so hard for you to comprehend it. Yeah, but when it's broken down for you, you're able to appreciate certain concepts, and this way we increase access to justice for people who at least know their rights at the workplace and how they move forward. In terms of making slides available for download, most of those slides, unfortunately, are subject to copyright protection. And so the best you can do is actually watch them because, again, that's the law applying because that's intellectual property. Most of these slides are available if you watch them online, and in future, we'll give options to premium content whereby you can watch an entire unit covered for you in the Kenyan context. If you want to understand IT law or business law, you can just actually access the premium content and watch the entire course. If you want to reach out to me and book a session for a particular section of law that you want to understand, that will be possible in the near future. Again, my ambassadors, thank you so much for keeping me here. We have 3 minutes to end this live. Next time, maybe you can suggest the topics we can work on next time. And this was just an overview. If you want the details, we have particular sections of law posted on Nairobi Legal Insights. Remember that. So you can give suggestions on what we can do better, on what we can improve on in our next live. Remember, again, it's a bit sad that I can't speak to each one of you, but I can only see a text you're posting. Yeah, it would have again have been more interesting if someone would at least speak so that I listen to them. But we can use the chat box for now so that I respond to some of your comments. If you are, again, a labor law student, I think at this point in time, I can even actually help you master a few things. Number one, as a labor law student, you must know the 3 general principles of employment. First one being prohibition against forced labor, discrimination, and sexual harassment. Know those 3 general principles. Know the specific sections that talk about these principles. Yeah. If you're a person who is not doing labor law, when you download the Employment Act of Kenya 2007, you can control find general principles of employment so that you read and get an overview. Yeah. The next thing you need to know as a labor law student, you must, before you prepare for that exam, you must go into that exam having understood what constitutes unfair termination. Yeah. What constitutes summary dismissal? What constitutes redundancy? What happens if an employee's salary has been reduced? Or what happens if someone has been sacked over phone? Someone just calls you in the morning and tells you, don't show up at work. That is illegal. It is not in line with the Employment Act. And again, we've covered all this content already on our channel, but remember, you must know those things. With those basic things, I don't think you can actually miss to get at least a 60% in the preparation that you are trying to engage in. Please post your questions. We have 2 more minutes to close our first live at Nairobi Legal Insights. Thank you for being my first ambassadors. And I'm going to be doing a video outlining the basics of doing a labor law exam in Kenya. And the more I receive questions from you, is the more I'll be able to actually improve my content. And in this last minute, I would want to thank you again. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for supporting Nairobi Legal. And Nairobi Legal is here to support you at all times. I'm here to learn from you as you learn from me. And have a great day. Thank you.